The Evolving Leader is a series that shares insights into the never-ending journey of leadership and entrepreneurship. Join us as 3Pillar CEO David DeWolf talks with peers who have been instrumental in his own leadership journey. Thanks for joining us for episode 7 of The Evolving Leader. We're honored to welcome Jamie Whitacre to the studio for this episode to discuss the next lesson for the Evolving Leader, scaling culture and developing a common ideology. Jamie is 3Pillar's Chief People Officer and one of the longest tenured team members at the company, having been there for 12 and a half years and counting. Jamie leads a global team of talent professionals and has been a key player in 3Pillar's rapid growth and spreading a culture of teamwork, innovation, and mutual respect. The company has gone from under 20 when she joined in 2009 to more than 2,000 today, and headcount doubled from 2020 to 21. So she's been busy, to say the least, these last few years. Jamie, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And for putting up with me for 12 and a half years. I didn't, it doesn't sink in until you hear it.
And thank you for putting up with me as well.
But so for this episode, it's going to center around scaling culture and developing a common ideology. 3Pillar, as we referenced, has seen explosive growth now in 9 countries around the world. So how do you scale culture on that level with a global team where you're often working with people for months or years before you ever actually meet them in person, if you ever do?
Yeah, such a great question. So when I think about culture, I think it's about first distilling what you mean. So what do we mean when we say culture? And at 3Pillar, what we mean is our values. What do we believe? What's the behaviors that that exist when no one is watching? And it all starts with really defining that, being really, really clear with what you mean when you say culture. I think a lot of companies will talk about it and say it's the foosball table, it's the people that are here, it's that we go out for happy hours, but that doesn't stand the test of time. And we even saw that in the pandemic, right? That that was something you couldn't do anymore. And so it's really about defining the values and what you mean when you say culture. I think from there, it's about, and actually you guys had Bobby on at some point, but he used to say this thing, communicate 7 different times, 7 different ways. Make sure that people don't just hear it once, but they hear it multiple times and in different ways, whether it's written form, video form, but find different ways to reinforce it. And so one of the things that we found to be really impactful is to reward for it. So to not reward for the highest performers, while that's important, that you also reward for living your culture and that you really look and you put people on a platform that have lived that culture for so long. The other one that I would just add is someone somewhere along the way told me culture becomes the lowest behavior that you tolerate. And when you allow a certain behavior to exist in the organization, it becomes okay. And so when you see bad behavior, you address it directly, you address it often, and that you sometimes have to make the really hard call to let somebody go. And I think especially in a global workforce where you don't see people all the time. You have to have these standard bearers, these leaders in those offices that know what we mean when we say culture, that they hold the bar for it, that they recognize for when someone's living it incredibly well, and that also when they see the bad behavior, they either address it, and sometimes that might mean even exiting somebody.
Jamie, you mentioned Bobby, and I remember early on in the early days of 3Pillar that you'd remember, Bobby and I used to have this fight that we actually talked about in the earlier episode you just mentioned. Bobby really believes that culture happens organically and by accident, right?
Yeah.
Almost. You and I have taken an approach of deliberate construction of culture, and you just discussed how, right? And one of the things I think Bobby and I came to was that this idea of culture, when you start with values and beliefs, that's what stays consistent. But over time, how it plays out changes and becomes not accidental, but purposeful to the values, but is applied to that point in time. You've seen us grow through so many phases, right? 20 people to 2,500 people is a lot of growth, different inflection points. Have you seen our culture change? What stayed the same? What has changed? And how have you navigated that evolution?
Yeah, such a great question. So what I would say is that first and foremost, what has changed is the way we broadcast it, right? When it was 20 employees, when Bobby was there, it was about going to lunch together and talking about them.
Learning through osmosis.
Yeah, exactly. Right. When we were 300 employees across the globe, it was us getting to the offices all the time. And now you have to teach it in a way that is transferable across time, across geographic boundaries, across you or I not being able to be in the offices with our team members. And so it's about how do we transfer that? And it has changed across time, but I think it's evolved to allow it to scale. And so what I would share as an example of something that I heard a couple of days ago was we have a center where we had a manager that said, you can't go play foosball until the end of you're done with your work. And had you or I been there, we would have said, no. Like, that is a place for them to recharge, to refresh, that we believe in intrinsic dignity, that it is so important for somebody to be able to pick their hours because that's the respect of the human. And now it can't be that, right? I happened to hear this story, but it was about there was a manager on the ground that had shared this with me, and I said, go back and address it with them, right? Like, let's go back and tell them the how. They've probably been taught nothing different, so how do we teach it? And so I think that enables it to evolve, right? Because it becomes more broader across the landscape of the geography. Scalable, right? Yeah.
I love that example because it's a very small one,
Yeah.
right? So often when we talk about culture, you talked about the worst behavior sets your culture. I totally believe that. This is an example of it. That's not horrid behavior, right?
Yeah.
It's not an integrity issue.
Yeah.
That's not total disrespect. But it's those little things. If you can create not only the clarity and the communication, but the systems. You talked about rewards. To really make sure that you're reinforcing and continually massaging culture. I think you can instill it more if you're addressing things at that level versus letting them become big.
Yeah, that's right. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's about teaching people how to do it in a way that also lives our values, right? Like what wouldn't have been our values is to go, or to our culture would be to go and, lay down the hammer and say that's unacceptable. It's to teach, it's to guide, it's to coach, to believe that there wasn't malintent. They just have been taught nothing different. Right. And so it's about the how, and how you address that as much as it is that you address it.
So true.
Let me jump in and ask, because you've both talked about the importance of values quite a bit, and I know that you did kind of a refresh of the 3 pillar values recently. What prompted the refresh of choosing 4 core values that are just like at the essence of who 3 pillar is and what you expect from your employees?
Scale and clarity, right? Like the values of 3 pillar haven't actually changed. What has changed is how we talk about them. The words that we use to describe them, the meat we've put on the bones to make them come alive, right? The deliberate process we went through was taking our existing values and really making sure we were highlighting the right things to make sure that we were really communicating what we meant, so that as it went from osmosis, right? When Jamie and I started, literally we were in the same office, right? I mean, Jamie was at the table in the room, and sometimes I'd have to kick her out to have a phone call.
This is in fact true, yes.
Wait, literally in the same office?
Literally sitting at the same table.
Right,
we had one office, and it was, a few of us sitting around it.
Okay.
That was our first office setup. When you have that environment and everybody's in that office, like, you just pick up things. It's osmosis. As you start to scale, you have to be so much more purposeful, right? And so it was, by now it was probably 4 years ago that we refined those values and put out that next evolution. But it was an intentional exercise to make sure we got buy-in from all of the executives, and that we got crystal clarity around what they meant, and we could cascade them at a scale we had not been at yet.
And I'd add that they're also incredibly relatable no matter where you are in the world. And that they're also, there's an ability for it to show up slightly differently, right? Like the way that you live open collaboration in Romania, very different than the way you live it in India, right? Or in Mexico. And so the prior set of values weren't wrong. It was just how do we make them more relatable and tangible, and then to be able to cross geographic boundaries and to be able to push into other locations where they can understand them a little bit better. We had gotten some feedback that, hey, this word doesn't quite translate as well for me.
Right.
I think like getting feedback through the years of just, hey, we want to make sure that people can really like look at the word and it can mean something to them almost immediately. And so I think it was that. And it was also an ability for us to, because we had such clarity, such alignment, then it could, to your point, scale, right? And to be able to be shared across teams.
And you actually just used the keyword word, right?
Yeah.
We took what used to be phrases and sentences
Yeah,
and
great point.
compacted them into 2 words that are powerful and memorable.
Yeah.
Because we want them on the top of everybody's minds. Now, we wrote a paragraph afterwards around what it meant,
Yeah.
and that's on the walls, and it is part of the awards, and we tell those stories.
Yeah.
But everybody can remember 4 sets of 2 words.
Yep.
So let me put you on the spot.
Yeah.
What are those 4 sets of 2 words so listeners know what the core values are?
So first and foremost is intrinsic dignity. We believe in the human person, that every single person is innately worthwhile in and of themselves. Not because of what they do, not because of what they contribute, but because they are a human, they matter, right? The second thing is open collaboration. We believe that the power of humanity really explodes when we work together, collaborate together, we share openly, we build on each other's ideas, right? That's a powerful thing. The next one is continuous improvement, right? We really believe that it's not about seeking perfection. It's not about getting it right the first time. It's about always continuing to seek excellence and to get better and to better and better. And we want to always be evolving as leaders, as a business, as individuals, as professionals.
Yeah.
And then finally, we believe in outsized impact. We believe that what we should do should have incredible leverage, that we should be able to not only change the world, but change the lives around us, that we want to have impact on individuals.
Yeah, and I think it's there's something that we haven't mentioned that I think is really important, which is why have them, right? Why have them in the first place? And it's so that people can attach to something greater than themselves, right? We talk about the place of, especially knowledge workers, the business that we're in. People want to come not just because they get a paycheck, right? You have to pay a certain amount that is in market, but they have to attach to something greater than themselves. And that is so important, right? And when you talk to people about why do you come and why do you stay, it's because they believe in these values, right? They align to their own core beliefs and their own personal beliefs. And there was this really cool exercise that our head of talent acquisition did 2 or 3 days ago, where she asked all of our talent acquisition partners, why do you love being here? And then what's your biggest pitch when you go to market? And what they talked about was team, right? The team and the ability to collaborate openly. And we mentioned all of our values, but also it's about our purpose. Like, why do we exist in the first place? And our values flow from that. And so what's so important is that people attach to that, right? That they don't want to come and they don't want to work in a vacuum and sit and finish their code and go home. While there's value in that at certain places, we believe that there's the power of team coming together and that our values flow from that. And so what you see is people coming to 3 Pillar because they want to be a part of that, and then staying because they want to be a part of it. And then the impact that not only drives for our people and in their lives, but also in the world around us is pretty incredible.
Yeah. The power of one team. We have a hashtag that flies around, one team. And that's the reminder of these values. And I love how you said the values flow from team. They also reinforce team.
Yeah.
They are the ingredients that make incredibly powerful, high-performing teams. So it's the self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jamie, let me ask, it seems like you can't turn on the TV or the radio without hearing about the Great Resignation. And it's been a challenging time these last few years.
Yeah.
And I think you alluded to some of how you have handled this in your last answer. And I know 3 Pillar has also grown through acquisition some, but your headcount has more than doubled in the last year and change. How are you attracting and retaining, new team members in this day and age?
Yeah. Such a good question. You're right. You can't pick up a article or get on the news about the Great Resignation. And quite frankly, I'm tired of the term. But it's in fact true, right? The reality is that the market is more competitive than it has ever been. We are in a supply-constrained market. And when you go to market in those environments, we called it out, I would guess, right around the beginning of the pandemic of what this was going to do to talent. And we just said, we have to not only double down on our strategy, but we also need to look for places for it to evolve and to grow with us. And that was key. we were ahead of the curve, but it doesn't mean that we still don't have the same challenges that every other business has. I think there's a couple of keys that I would point to. One, we've already talked about, right? That you have this this something that ties something to the business that's different, right? And I think the companies that didn't have that before struggled significantly, right? They didn't have something that was known or that they could talk about. It was, do you want to come for the highest pay? And while there are people that will gravitate towards that, guess what they're also going to do, right? They're going to leave for the highest pay, right? They get that call the next day and they're going to. And so it was about really, one, going back to our roots, but making sure that we broadcasted that not just to the market, right, to recruit talent, but also to our employees and to remind them of why Three Pillar was special. And I'd point to something that oddly the pandemic enabled us to do, which was to remind people that we actually care about them as humans. It seems so simple, but I think most businesses get it wrong. They see people as resources, and you know this, that I hate the term human resources. It's why I'm not the CHRO, because it sees your talent as resources. And while there's an element of truth to that, if you only see them as that, you've gotten it wrong. And I was just talking to a colleague earlier this morning, and I was like, why have you been here for so long, right? And it's because I can show up as my authentic self. I can be the mom that I want to be. I can be the wife that I want to be, and the professional, and it can all be true. And so being able to create an environment where that is not only true, but then you can market that to the market, so key, because many businesses just don't get it right? They focus on well-being. Well, what do you mean? It's not just the course that you take to help with your anxiety. It's about actually caring about the human at the end of the day.
Right.
And so I think it's about having that bedrock of differentiation of your employee value proposition that's broadcasted out to the market, that is broadcasted to your team members to remind them, right? And that it's authentic and true, and it's not just talk, that it's actually real.
None of this stuff we're talking about can be a poster on the wall.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can put it on the wall, right? Every office has the same values wall, right, that we have.
Yeah.
But it has to be so much more than that. That has to be a simple reminder of what they experience every day.
Yeah.
And it's our job to create those systems and those processes that reinforce that, those rewards and recognition that Jamie talked about. How do you tell the stories, right? I think the lore really matters. Do you have those staple stories where you can hold up examples of this is what we want, right? And do you recognize that behavior and really then urge people to pass it on, teach it?
And I think it's about, we have a concept called values ambassadors at Three Pillar, and it was something that has evolved across time, and it's people that champion our values. And we did something pretty bold in the past year, which was not just to take this values ambassadors program and wildly shepherded it across the organization, but also we invested in these people and we gave them ownership in the business to say, you are such an important asset to Three Pillar. You are helping us to shape our culture. It is a differentiator. It's helping us to attract and retain in this wildly competitive market. All great, but we also want to back up what we're saying, right? And it goes back to, it can't just be a poster on a wall. We can't just say you're an ambassador and we appreciate you. We actually have to back it up. And then not just those ambassadors, but ambassadors of our brand, right? People that go out and post. I love seeing all the posts that we have of, hey, I just onboarded at Three Pillar and look at all my cool swag. Well, swag's fine, right? But it's about the pride that they post. It's like I saw one of our alumni posting that he landed at Google, which is cool. We want to celebrate it. I was like, oh, we have those posts too. This is so great, right? But it's about that pride and that coming there. And I think there's a lot of, back to your question, Will, like operational things you can do. But if you do operations just for operations' sake, but it doesn't have the heart and the soul behind it, right? Like just a simple example. One of the things to attract in this market, you have to condense your hiring time, right? You can't go out to market and do it in the same amount of time you used to. But you can't lose that specialness, right? You can't lose that experience that the candidate has. You can't lose the fact that we don't just assess for technical fit, but that we assess for culture fit, right? Because if you start to lower that bar, that's going to become your new norm.
That's right.
Yeah. So let me ask you, David. We're talking about the name of the podcast is The Evolving Leader. Mm-hmm. Jamie started at Three Pillar, fresh out of James Madison as a recruiter, right?
Kind of. The funny part about that story is I actually was in accounting for a brief moment.
Okay.
And quickly realized was not my not my profession.
Good self-awareness,
Yes.
definitely.
She learned very quickly.
Yeah.
But so we're with a living, breathing, evolving leader. Can
No
you
doubt.
share just how? I don't know what the question is here, but I guess the statement would be Jamie has gone from being a entry-level hire just out of college to being a member of your C-level executive team.
Yeah.
How has that happened?
Yeah. Jamie is what you would expect from an executive, incredibly hungry. She's also incredibly humble. And through that, she has had an ability where she just soaks up feedback and runs after it. And so I would describe Jamie as incredibly not only competent, but coachable. And what she has done is she's had enough self-awareness to be able to know that, hey, this is a journey. This is an evolving journey where I have to grow. And there have been 3 times, and the first time she was in tears with me, but there have been 3 times that I had to hire over her and bring somebody in that she could learn from. And it was hard. Probably every time it was hard for her. The first time was obviously the hardest, but every single time within 2 years, she had surpassed that person in leadership. And she just soaked up what she could learn and she took it. And then I'd go back and I'd challenge her, okay, this is the next phase of grace. This is the next phase of growth. And she continued to just do that and run after it and want to be exceptional. And you were just amazing throughout your whole career. You have lived that way of how can I be a better and better person and professional and culture ambassador and you name it. You always seek that excellence and are willing to evolve your approach in order to get there.
Yeah. And I think there's, you guys have had a lot of people on and reflecting on just the time at 3 Pillar, it's been access to incredible leaders, right? And I think that's when you talk about our culture, it kind of sits somewhere in between core beliefs and like maybe, I don't know exactly know where it sits, but hiring incredible leaders, right? We've had so many along the way, right? You guys have had Bobby, Jen Stanford, Pete Buer. Like there are just people that I've had access to and that have, because they've come in and lived our values, right? They're willing to sit down out of the kindness of their heart and be like, hey, let me give you some feedback, right? Or, hey, here's something that I learned. Like, make your own scars, make your own mistakes. Don't have the same ones that I do.
Yeah.
And so we've just had such access to such incredible people across time, yourself included, that has been just incredible mentors to me along my journey, and never hesitated to, one, support me, but also to make sure that I had clarity on feedback that I needed.
And genuinely care.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's great talented people. We've been fortunate to be surrounded by people that genuinely care and want to help us grow.
Yeah.
Want to help us get to that next level and have been willing to serve, right? And I think that's, Bobby's a great example, right? And there's no way at that point in time in the company's history that he should have come and worked for me, right? But he turned down the CEO job in order to come work for me. And that's just the type of attitude that I think we've been fortunate to be surrounded by incredible mentors.
Yeah. Yeah.
So David, let me ask one question as we get toward the end of the episode. We talked about common ideology at the beginning, and we haven't touched on it a whole lot. I mean, we've talked about values and core beliefs and things like that. But do you believe that a common and shared ideology influences culture, or is it the other way around?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's where culture comes from. I think if you don't have a common ideology, your culture is accidental. And so I think it is the foundation. Your purpose and your values have to be the staple. And then you surround that purpose and values with a vision of where do you want to go. And we have something very unique, what we call our stakeholder philosophy. What does it mean to be the multiple constituents of an organization? And we say that for our clients, for our employees, and for our investors, we're fighting for maniacal win-win-win situations. We want that maniacal balance of benefit for all of them. And we're intentional about not choosing one over the other. That makes us different from others. And so we define who we are, how we interact with each other, and where we're going. And that's ideology. That's where culture comes from.
Yeah. And something that's funny, you said accidental. It made me think about like the fact that as businesses, as you're figuring out how to scale culture, recognizing that there is a reverse of culture, right? There is, or values, and there's accidental values. So things that show up because you have these values. And for us, I'll give you an example. open collaboration is so core to who we are. In its scariest form, it can become consensus driven.
Right.
And if you're really aware of and deliberate about what your ideology is, you can also manage to those accidental values and own them, right? We kind of just say, like, we're a little bit weird about consensus. And you can also work towards improving it across time, right? We want to be, as we scale, we can't be fully consensus driven, but we don't want to lose that open collaboration aspect. And so it just made me think of that. And I think that's something that businesses sometimes like try to hide away from, or they're not clear enough on their values and what they mean by culture that they can even know what those are, right? The accidental values actually become something that, I wish that didn't show up, but it does, right? And that's
embracing it, admitting it, and overcoming it, right? So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Nice. Well, Jamie, thank you very much for joining us today. Great to see you again. If people are interested in connecting with you or learning more about 3 Pillar, where should they go?
Yeah. So I think the most scalable way, to use the word that we use the whole time, is careers.3pillarglobal.com. But honestly, the more personable way is reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to David. We get so many different messages across time, and I try to answer all of them and get you on the right path. So LinkedIn or our careers page would be great.
All right, very nice. Well, Jamie, thanks again for joining us to talk culture, common ideology, and how to scale ideas, values, and beliefs across a global organization. Great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you, David.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of The Evolving Leader. If you liked what you heard, please give us a 5-star rating, a glowing review, and a share on whichever social media networks you call home. For more on the podcast and to view video of each episode, please visit daviddewolf.com/podcast.